Hello, if you want to watch exclusive lemon content on What If Naruto, then go to my Boosty. The first link in the description here contains such hot stories for adults, such as What If Naruto was a daddy for Sarada, or Kushina and Mikoto vulgar Naruto mommies. Follow the link and enjoy. I'm waiting for you.
Naruto opened his eyes, coughing violently. The pain in his chest was blinding. The last thing he remembered was the moon turning red, Madara Uchiha's chakra choking the world, and Kurama roaring inside, forcing his chakra reserves beyond the mortal limit to activate a effin jutsu that none of. They both understood completely. He sat up slowly, clutching his stomach. His clothes were shredded, but his wounds were slowly closing, thanks to the residual chakra of the fox. Kurama called Naruto in his mind. The mental space was unusually dark and silent. Several seconds passed before a hoarse and exhausted voice answered, "I'm still here, brat." But barely. The jump tore our chakra network. We made it. We escaped from the infinite illusion. But I'm afraid we broke the clock in the process. Naruto frowned, looking around. The corpses lying in the mud were not wearing the uniforms of the Shinobi Alliance. They were wearing old-fashioned vests, and the face shields belonged to the Iwa Rock Hidden Village and the Cloud Hidden Village. Kumo. There was no sign of the White Zetsus or the Jub. Before he could process the information, a rumble shook the forest a kilometer to the east. A shockwave swept through the trees, followed by an unmistakable roar. It was dense chakra, heavy and loaded with pure hatred. It was the Kyuubi chakra. What the hell? Kurama, you are inside me. Why do I feel your chakra far away? Naruto asked, jumping to his feet, ignoring the pain. Because it's not me, you idiot. Or at least, I'm not the me of your time. Go over there. Someone has broken the seal temporarily. Naruto didn't think twice about it. He channeled chakra into his feet and shot out through the trees, moving at a blurry speed. As he got closer, the smell of ozone and burning would saturated the air. He broke into a raised clearing. In the center, surrounded by 5 elite Kumo ninjas, stood a young Kunoichi. He was on his knees, panting, with cuts on his arms and legs. But what captured Naruto's attention was not his condition, but his hair. It was a deep red, bright as blood. Fresh, rippling wildly from the energy emanating from her body. An aura of orange and bubbling chakra, the first tail of the Kyuubi, fluttered around him. "The seal is weakening," shouted one of the Cloud Ninjas, preparing a scroll full of suppressor kanjis, a trading. "In the hour before I lose my sanity, the Reikikage will pay a fortune for the Hinchiriki." Naruto felt his blood boil. He did not know who the girl was, but seeing the fox's cloak being hunted like an animal awakened a fierce protective instinct inside him. A Kumo ninja lunged at her with an electrified sword. The red-haired girl looked up, her slanted, scarlet eyes filled with fury and despair, bracing for the impact. The blow never came. An orange flash came between them. Naruto intercepted Kumo's sword with a cradle and naked. The clash of steel against steel echoed in the clearing. Without giving the enemy time to blink, Naruto spun on his axis, planting a devastating kick on the Cloud Ninja's chest, sending him flying through 3 thick trunks until he was knocked unconscious. Silence fell over the clearing. The remaining 4 Kumo ninjas instinctively recoiled at the newcomer's absurd speed. The red-haired girl blinked, the bubbling chakra mantle slowly receding as surprise replaced her fury. He looked at the back of his savior, a tall blonde guy with a torn vest and an overwhelming presence. Who are you?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly from exhaustion. Naruto slowly turned to her. Seeing his face from the front, the round features, the violet eyes, and that gravity-defying red hair, a massive short circuit occurred in the boy's brain. I didn't know her. I had never seen his face in person, not even in clear photographs. But her instinct, her Uzumaki blood, and the fox inside her screamed out a truth that her mind still couldn't process. Naruto's heart took a painful turn in his chest. He felt an instantaneous, magnetic connection, something pulling him towards her with an absolute gravitational force. I am. Naruto swallowed, unable to look away from his violent eyes. I'm Uzumaki Naruto. The girl opened her eyes wide when she heard the last name. He leaned shakily on his knees, forcing a twisted, fierce and beautiful smile, which made Naruto short of breath. Wow. A distant relative, she said, clenching a fist. With determination. I'm Kushina. Kushina Uzumaki. You're gonna help me kick these assholes, aren't you, Naruto? Time seemed to freeze for the blonde. Kushina. The name echoed in his mind like a distant echo. He still hadn't tied up the ends of his own bloodline. I was just seeing an incredibly strong and vibrant girl who had just robbed him of all the attention in the universe. Naruto forced his trademark smile, squeezing his crib, and he's counting on it. The 4 remaining Cloud Ninjas regrouped, forming a circle around Naruto and Kushina. Their swords sizzled with Raiten Ray element chakra, illuminating the rain-darkened forest. I don't know who you are, brat, Kumo's squad leader hissed, adjusting his mask. But no one interferes with the affairs of the cloud. Kill them both. Naruto wasted no time. He brought his hands to the front and traced the cross seal. Kajiban without no jutsu. 6 shadow clones exploded into clouds of smoke around him. Without waiting for orders, the clones rushed forward, intercepting 3 of the enemy ninjas in a frantic exchange of taijutsu. The sound of clashing metal and muffled screams echoed in the clearing. Naruto knew that his real body was on the limit. Time travel and the forced use of the Kurama chakra had almost completely drained his reserves. He could not afford a prolonged combat or massive jutsus. I had to be quick. The Kumo leader, seeing his men busy with the clones, traced seals at an enviable speed and aimed directly at Kushina, who was still kneeling trying to stabilize her breathing. Raiten Hibasi. Electromagnetic murder. A burst of pure electricity shot out of the boy's hands, cutting the air towards the redhead. Careful! Naruto shouted. Using the Shunsin no Jutsu, Naruto appeared right in front of Kushina. He accumulated photal wind element chakra in his lungs and exhaled forcefully. Datopa fetus. Big break. The wall of wind collided head-on with the lightning. In the chakra table of natures, the wind is superior to the lightning. Naruto's blast not only dissipated the electricity, but sent the shockwave back towards Kumo's leader, forcing him to take cover and retreat several meters. Kushina, seeing the opening that Naruto had created, was not far behind. The indomitable spirit of the Uzumaki clan burned in his veins. She forced her body up, her red hair floating menacingly in the air. Don't underestimate me, you idiots! Kushina roared. From his back, a metallic, creaking sound split the air. 4 solid chakra chains, golden and resplendent, shot out of his body like deadly snakes. They were the ones with FS to diamond sealing chains, the secret jutsu of the Uzumaki bloodline. The chains crossed the clearing in the blink of an eye. 2 of them wrapped themselves around the Kumo leader's arms, instantly immobilizing him and suppressing his chakra, while the other 2 hit the remaining ninjas who were fighting the Naruto clones, crashing them against the mud. The fight was over in less than a minute. Naruto stood still, panting softly. His clones disappeared in small clouds of smoke. He turned to look at Kushina and was paralyzed. She was illuminated by the faint golden glow of her own chains. His breathing was labored, the rain was sticking close to his wounded body. But his violet eyes shone with an absolute fierceness and determination. Naruto's stomach turned. I have never seen someone so strong, so wild and Greek, so beautiful. She was exactly the kind of woman he had always admired loudly, but with a presence that left him speechless. Kushina retracted the chains, which vanished into thin air. The final effort was too much for his exhausted body. His eyes rolled, and he slumped forward. Hey! Hey! Naruto reacted on instinct, lunging at her and catching her before she hit the ground. He held her in his arms. It was surprisingly light, but the chakra emanating from it was overwhelmingly familiar. Warm, dense, with that dark and heavy background that Naruto knew better than anyone. Deep in his mental space, the huge nine-tailed fox opened a red eye. That woman. Kurama growled, his voice echoing in Naruto's head. His stamp is the same as yours. She's my container at the moment, brat. Your container, Naruto thought, feeling a chill. He looked at Kushina's pale face. His round features, the shape of his nose. There was an undeniable resemblance that his brain refused to process completely. Obfuscated by the sudden and intense attraction he had felt watching her struggle. Carefully, Naruto leaned her back against a tree trunk. He took off his own tattered jacket and put it on over it to protect it from the cold of the rain. He looked at her carefully. Her dark red hair was fascinating. He remembered the stories he had been told about the Uzumaki clan and their tragic end in the Whirlpool village. The thought that she was of his own blood, a survivor like him, lit a protective fire in his chest. A whine put him out of his thoughts. Kushina opened her eyes slowly, blinking to focus the view. She saw Naruto's face bending over her, with those strange whisker marks on his cheeks and the ruffled blonde hair. "Hey, Uzumaki," murmured Kushina, forcing a weak smile, her voice rough but loaded with sarcasm. "For a brat, you don't fight bad at all." Naruto felt his face grow warm. No one had ever called him a brat with such affection and chutzpah at the same time. "You weren't bad either," Datebeo replied Naruto without thinking, letting his verbal crutch escape. Kushina opened her eyes a lot. That expression was like an echo of his own Datebane. He let out a little laugh that ended in a coughing fit. He brought his hand to his stomach, where the seal was burning weakly. "We have to move," Kushina said, trying to stand up, but her legs were shaking. "How?" "They are taking advantage of the chaos at the border to kidnap me. My escort from Konoha was ambushed. If we stay here, they'll send reinforcements." Naruto didn't have time to hesitate. He crouched down with his back to her. "Come on up. You're in no condition to run, and my chakra recovers fast. I'll take you to a safe place." Kushina hesitated for a second, looking at the mysterious boy's broad back. He was the same age as her, maybe a couple of years older, but he radiated absolute security. With a sigh of resignation, he put his arms around Naruto's neck and let himself be charged. The contact made both of them feel an electric current, a pure resonance of Uzumaki chakra mixed with the distant echo of the Ninetales. For Kushina, it was a feeling of security that she had never felt with anyone before. For Naruto, it was the beginning of an emotional chaos. He was carrying an amazing girl, strong and vibrant, feeling her soft breathing on his neck, completely unaware that fate had just played the cruelest and most dangerous prank on him in the universe. Naruto jumped into the branches of the trees, into the forest in the rain, away from the battlefield, towards the territory of Konoha. The rain intensified, turning into a monsoon that hit the forest of the border of the country of fire. Naruto, carrying Kushina on his back, was moving through the trees with the agility of a veteran ambo. But his breathing was starting to get heavy. The time jump had shattered his reserves, and the Kurama chakra inside him was still slowly recovering. About 10 kilometers from the ambush site, Naruto's sensory system detected an anomaly in the terrain, a small natural cavern, hidden behind a dense curtain of poison ivy and sharp rocks. "Hold on tight," Naruto muttered, altering his jump vector. He landed heavily in front of the entrance. Kushina clung to her neck, shivering from the cold and blood loss. Naruto carefully pushed the ivy aside and stepped into the darkness of the cave. The place was narrow, dry, and smelled of damp earth, but it was a safe haven. Naruto slowly knelt down, allowing Kushina to slide off his back. The redhead leaned against the rock wall, letting out a choked moan of pain as she brushed against the deep cuts on her arms and thighs. "Don't move," Naruto ordered, his voice taking on a tone of gentle authority that surprised Kushina. The blonde man sat down in front of her, crossed his legs. He pulled out a couple of basic medical scrolls that he always wore sealed on his wristbands, a remnant of Sakura's teachings during the war. However, there was no story that could close the wounds caused by the corrosive chakra of Kumo's Reikiri so quickly. Kushina watched him in the gloom. The blonde boy had a frown, focused. Despite the tiredness evident in his blue eyes, he radiated a warmth that counteracted the cold of the cave. "No. You don't have to do this," Kushina whispered, coughing slightly. "My Uzumaki healing factor will take care of it. I just need to rest for a couple of hours." Naruto looked into her eyes. There was something so fragile and fierce about her at the same time, like a flame that refuses to go out in the rain. His heart took a painful and magnetic turn again. "You're losing blood, you idiot," Naruto replied with a sideways smile, using a tone that Kushina wasn't used to hearing in ninjas at heart. Noah, who treated her with fear or distance. "And your chakra is unstable. The fox tried to get out a while ago, didn't he?" Kushina immediately tensed up. Her violet eyes opened in alarm, and her hand instinctively flew to her stomach, hiding the seal under her torn clothes. "How? How do you know about that?" Kushina demanded, her voice becoming cold and defensive. "No one outside the cage and the council knows what's inside of me, who you really are, Naruto." Naruto cursed internally. He had talked about more. Kurama, inside, let out a low growl. "Be careful what you say, brat. If you tell him that you come from the future, the damage to the timeline will be catastrophic." Naruto swallowed and forced his brain to work at top speed. He looked her straight in the eye, projecting the utmost sincerity he could muster. "I'm an Uzumaki, just like you," Naruto said quietly. "My family escaped from Utsusio Gakure before it was destroyed. I've been traveling like a renegade ninja, looking for mine. And I know about the fox because I can feel it. Our chakra reserves are huge, but yours. It has an echo. A heavy and dark echo. I've dealt with Hinshirikis before." The tension in Kushina's shoulders decreased millimetrically. The story made sense to her. The destruction of the Whirlpool country had scattered his clan all over the world, and extreme sensory ability was a hallmark of his blood. Besides, this boy had saved her by risking his own life. Kushina lowered her hand from her stomach, sighing. "A lost Uzumaki," she murmured, a sad smile curving her lips. "Then you really are my family. I never thought I would find someone of my blood outside of Konoha, Tabane." Kushina's verbal tirade hit Naruto like a cradle and straight to the chest. The Theban resonated so perfectly with his own date ballast that it almost hurt. The familiarity was intoxicating. "Let me blame you," Kushina insisted, Naruto, moving a little closer. He extended his hands, which began to emit a pale green glow, the basic mystical palm senjutsu he had learned on the battlefield. But Naruto knew it wasn't enough. Carefully, he forced Kurama to filter a minuscule, purified and warm amount of his healing red chakra through the palms of his hands. Mixing it with the medical green, he placed his hands gently on Kushina's bloody arm. The contact was electrical. Kushina let out a small gasp as Naruto's chakra penetrated her wounds. He didn't burn like his own fox's chakra when he lost control. It was warm, vibrant, and strangely comforting. The deep cut on his forearm began to visibly close, the flesh weaving at an astonishing speed. For Kushina, who had always been feared or treated as a weapon for carrying the Kyuubi, feeling Naruto's healing and fearless touch was overwhelming. He looked up and met the boy's blue eyes, which were focused on his wound with a fierce and protective intensity. "Why are you traveling alone?" Kushina asked in a whisper, feeling that her cheeks were warmed in the darkness of the cave by the closeness of their faces. Naruto did not look up, fearing that if he looked her in the eye, he would reveal the truth of her provenance. "Because I lost everyone," Naruto replied with brutal sincerity, remembering the war, Neji, his parents whom he never knew, and the shattered future he came from. "The war consumes everything. But I promised that if I found someone important, I wouldn't let him die. Give yourself a break." Kushina felt a lump in her throat. That pure determination, that light in the midst of so much darkness, was something I rarely saw in Konoha, where everything was politics and duty. She leaned forward slightly, moved by an impulse she could not control. "Well, you're not alone anymore, Naruto," Kushina said firmly, her red hair falling like a cascade of fire over her eyes. She lifted her good hand and placed it on his, stopping his medical jutsu. "I'm fine now. Thank you." Naruto stopped the chakra flow and finally looked into her eyes. They were so close that their breaths were mingled. Kushina's wild beauty had him completely spellbound. She was strong, proud, with an unbreakable spirit. The kind of person he had always dreamed of having by his side. Instinct was screaming at him to shorten the distance. Kushina did not back down either. In fact, her violet eyes softened, and the tension between the two changed from gratitude to something dense, warm, and dangerously intimate. Just as Naruto was about to say something, a high-pitched sound tore through the silence of the rain. It was the unmistakable whistle of an ambo summoning bird patrolling the skies. Kushina blinked, coming out of the trance, and quickly turned away, her face the color of her hair. "Those are the reinforcements of Konoha," stuttered Kushina, awkwardly getting to her feet. "They're looking for me. You have to come to the village with me, Naruto. If you are in Uzumaki, the Hokage will give you asylum. I owe you." Naruto slowly stood up, feeling the cold emptiness where his hands were before. Going to Konoha in the past was the biggest temporary risk I could take. But looking at Kushina, and the idea of parting with her after what they had just shared, was physically painful for him. He clenched his fists. The future was already broken. Maybe fate had brought him here for a reason. "I'll come with you, Kushina," Naruto said, forcing a confident smile. "But there better be ramen in your village, because I'm starving." Kushina let out a genuine and crystal-clear laugh that echoed in the cave, making Naruto's heart take that dangerous and addictive turn again. "The best in the world, I promise, I bane you." Together, the fox of the future and the bloody fan of the past walked out of the cave into the storm, unaware of the gigantic temporal and emotional storm in which they ended up to enter. The huge green gates of Konoha stood in front of them, imposing and familiar. The rain had stopped, leaving a smell of wet dirt and pine in the air. Naruto walked one step behind Kushina, scrutinizing every shadow. At first glance, it was the same village that he knew, but the faces carved into the mountain were only 3. There was no Tsunades, nor Kakashi's, much less his. And the thing that oppressed his chest the most was not Minato Namikaze's. The Chunin guards at the entrance crossed their spears upon seeing them approaching, but upon recognizing Kushina's red hair, they immediately relaxed. "Kushina-sama?" one of the guards exclaimed, opening his eyes wide at the sight of his clothes torn and stained with blood. "The Mbula squads are searching all over the border. What happened? And who is this stranger?" Before Kushina could open her mouth to answer, the air vibrated with a sharp, almost imperceptible sound, like the hum of a restrained lightning. A blinding yellow flash appeared out of nowhere, materializing right between Kushina and Naruto. When the light faded, it revealed a young blonde ninja, dressed in Konoha's tactical vest. Her blue eyes were filled with overwhelming worry. It was Minato Namikaze, the future Yellow Lightning. "Kushina." Minato took a step forward, completely ignoring Naruto, and put his hands gently on the redhead's shoulders, examining her with his gaze. "I felt your escort's chakra network disappearing. I used the Irasen no Jutsu God of Flying Thunder as soon as I received the report. Are you hurt?" "The seal is on." Kushina tensed slightly at the contact. Although Minato had always been kind and attentive to her since the academy, his overprotection sometimes suffocated her. "I'm fine," Minato replied Kushina, taking a subtle step back to wriggle out of his grip. "I was ambushed by Kumo ninjas. They wanted to take advantage of the war to take the you-know-what. But someone got me out of there." Minato finally blinked and turned his head, noticing the presence of the young man, who was barely 2 meters away. Minato's blue eyes met Naruto's blue eyes. Time seemed to stand still for the time traveler. Seeing his father young, alive, and standing in front of him was a devastating emotional blow. But that feeling of longing was immediately drowned out by something much darker and more primitive. The sight of Minato's hands on Kushina's shoulders had ignited a spark of irrational, burning jealousy in Naruto's stomach. In his headspace, Kurama growled with warning. "That's the 4th time, brat. Control your emotions, or your chakra will leak, and both of us will be discovered. If you change the past here, you could erase your own existence." But Naruto was having a hard time thinking. "Think clearly. The protective instinct and the gravitational attraction he had developed towards Kushina in the last few hours clouded his judgment. Instinctively, Naruto took a step forward, closing the distance, his presence becoming heavy and intimidating. Minato narrowed his eyes. Like an elite sensor, he felt the immense amount of chakra emanating from this unknown boy. It was vast, wild, and dangerously similar to that of Kushina. Minato lowered his right hand towards the cover of his crib and three-pointed special, adopting a subtle defensive posture. "Who are you?" Minato asked, his voice losing the previous warmth and adopting the cold tone of a Konoha shinobi. "What are you doing with it?" Naruto clenched his jaw, resisting the urge to pull out his own kunai. "He's with me," Minato intervened Kushina quickly, getting between the two blondes. He extended a protective arm in front of Naruto, a gesture that surprised both of them. "Let your guard down. He was the one who defeated the Cloud Squadron and butted me. His name is Naruto Uzumaki. He is a survivor of the Whirlpool Country." Minato opened his eyes in surprise, his hand moving away from his gun. He looked at the ruffled blonde hair and the marks on Naruto's cheeks. It didn't look like a traditional Uzumaki, but Kushina's statement was absolute. And the chakra. There was definitely an resonance there. "And Uzumaki?" Minato murmured, softening his expression, although the distrust did not completely disappear from his eyes. He offered a hand to Naruto. "If you saved Kushina, you have my eternal gratitude. I'm Minato Namikaze." Naruto looked at the outstretched hand. The man who had given him life, the hero who had sealed the Kyuubi inside him, was thanking him for saving the woman, who now made Naruto's heart run wild. It was a cruel and twisted paradox. With an expressionless face, Naruto shook Minato's hand. The grip was firm, almost a silent challenge. Between two forces of nature. "I did what any member of the clan would do," Namikaze replied Naruto, his tone deliberately neutral, using the surname to mark distance. "I couldn't let someone so important be taken away." Kushina felt a warmth rise up her cheeks as she listened. The important word to come out of Naruto's lips. Unlike the Konoha ninjas who saw her as a burden or a strategic military weapon. This boy looked at her as if she was the center of his attention. Minato noticed the slight blush on Kushina's face, and the exchange of glances between her and the stranger. An uncomfortable knot formed in the yellow lightning's stomach. He had been in love with Kushina since they were children, and although she barely tolerated him sometimes, she had never seen another guy approach her so naturally. "We need to go directly to the Okage Tower," Minato said, breaking the tension and embracing his role as leader. "The third one needs a report of the ambush, and Danzo will want to interrogate the newcomer. The policies with refugees in times of war are strict." "No one is going to interrogate him like a prisoner," snapped Kushina, her red hair starting to float slightly with indignation, revealing her volcanic temper. "It is of my blood, my birth. I'll answer for him to old Iruzen." "Come on, Naruto." Kushina grabbed Naruto by the wrist, pulling him forcefully towards the inside of the village. Naruto let himself go, feeling her soft skin against his. Before turning around completely, he gave Minato one last look over his shoulder. It was not a look from a son to his father. It was the look of a predator marking its territory. Minato stood at the gates of the village, watching as the girl he loved dragged a complete stranger through the streets of Konoha. The wind ruffled her blonde hair, and for the first time in her impeccable career as a child, the future fourth Okage felt that an uncontrollable storm had just been unleashed on her life. The office of the third cage smelled of pipe smoke and old scrolls. The atmosphere, however, was so tense that it seemed about to suffocate those present. Iruzen Sarutobi was sitting behind his desk, exhaling a thick cloud of smoke. To his right, wrapped in bandages and leaning on his cane, was Danzo Shimura, whose only visible eye pierced Naruto with icy suspicion. Behind the blonde boy, Kushina stood with her arms crossed, defiantly, while Minato Namikaze silently watched from a corner, evaluating every micro-expression of the outsider. "A survivor of Utsusio Gakure," repeated Iruzen in a grave voice, putting away his pipe. "It's a tragic story, young Naruto. And your intervention saved Kushina from Kumo's clutches. Konoha owes you a debt of gratitude." Gratitude does not ensure loyalty, Ruzan interrupted Danzo, his raspy voice cutting through the air. He appears out of nowhere right at the border, possesses massive chakra reserves, and claims to be a lost Uzumaki. He could be an Iwekumo spy using an advanced transformation jutsu. In times of war, paranoia is survival. He should be handed over to the Root Interrogation Division immediately. Kushina took a step forward, her violet eyes burning with ire. You're not going to touch it, Danzo. His chakra resonated with mine, and with him. With my stamp. He cured me using a superior medical jutsu. If it was from Kumo, he would have killed or kidnapped me while I was unconscious. Minato's jaw tensed as he listened to the vehemence with which Kushina defended him. Naruto remained impassive on the outside, but inside, his mind was working at 1,000 per hour. If Danzo took him to the root and tried to pry into his mind with the Yamanaka clan, they would find out that he came from the future. The timeline would collapse. He needed an irrefutable proof, something that only a true Uzumaki could do. Kurama, Naruto called in his headspace. I need a miracle. Do you know any unsealed F in jutsu from the land of the whirlpool that can convince these paranoid old men? The huge fox growled in the darkness, wagging one of its tails. I've lived inside Mito Uzumaki and now inside this girl with red hair. I know the seals of their damn clan better than they know themselves. Listen carefully, brat. I will guide you step by step. Tell them that you will show them the containment seal of the 4 blood barriers. Naruto blinked, coming back to reality. He stepped forward, stepping peacefully between Kushina's fury and Danzo's scrutinizing eye. I understand your distrust, Lord Anzo, Naruto said, forcing a respectful tone that cost him horrors to maintain. Red hair is not the only mark of our clan. If the Okage allows me, I will demonstrate my heritage with the art that made my family fearsome. An old F in jutsu of Uchiho Gakure. Irasina felt slowly, intrigued. Go ahead, Naruto. Prove it. Naruto knelt down in the center of the office. He bit his right thumb until it drew blood. Instead of using a parchment, he began to trace kanjis directly on the wood of the floor. He closed his eyes, letting Kurama's gravelly voice dictate every stroke. The calligraphy was brutally complex, a network of overlapping symbols representing chakra flows, spatial barriers, and spiritual locks. Minato, who was a prodigy at F in jutsu, leaned forward. Her blue eyes widened. The logical structure of that seal was something he was just beginning to theorize. It was ancient, intricate, and perfect. When Naruto finished the last stroke, he rested the bloody palm of his hand on the center of the diagram. Instead of using normal chakra, Kurama filtered out a tiny drop of pure red chakra, camouflaged under the density of Naruto's Uzumaki chakra. F. In Jutsu Shishikekai. For image barrier sealing jutsu, Naruto muttered. The kanji written in blood shone with an intense crimson light. They took off from the ground, floating in the air like strings of solid text, and formed a perfect cubic barrier around Naruto. The air inside the office became heavy. The seal was not only a physical barrier, it actively absorbed the chakra from the environment. Danzo took a step back, surprised. Kushina stared in wonder at the bright letters, feeling a deep connection with the ancestral jutsu of her ancestors. Minato swallowed hard. It's authentic, the yellow lightning confirmed, his tone mixing awe and professional respect. The sealing matrix uses the user's own blood as an anchor. It is an S-grade technique exclusive to the royalty of the Uzumaki clan. It is impossible to copy with the Sharingan or imitate with a transformation jutsu. Naruto undid the seal with a wave of his hand, and the kanji turned into harmless smoke. He stood up, wiping the blood off his thumb. I hope that's enough to dispel your doubts, Naruto said, looking directly at Irizen. The third Kage smiled, a warm smile that Naruto deeply missed from his time. More than enough, Naruto. On behalf of Konoha, I offer you the official. However, I can't give you immediate military rank without evaluating your teamwork. And Ruzan took a puff at his pipe and looked at the 3 blonde young men and the redhead. Minato, Kushina. Konoha is short-staffed because of the skirmishes at the border. They will form a provisional team of 3 men. Minato will be the captain. They will evaluate Naruto's skills in the field. His first B-rank mission will start first thing tomorrow. Kushina let out a small cry of victory, raising her fist. Great! I'll show you the village, Naruto, I'll bang you. Minato nodded with professionalism. Understood, Okage-sama. We will be an efficient team. Naruto nodded, but inside his stomach turned. He was going to share missions, camps and battles with the father he never knew and the mother who stole his breath. I was trapped in the most emotionally dangerous team in all of ninja history. Danzo Shimura didn't say another word. He simply turned on his heels and walked out of the office, his cane rhythmically tapping the ground. His hidden I was already planning how to use this new and powerful Uzumaki asset for his own purposes. As they were leaving the office, Kushina grabbed Naruto by the arm, excitedly dragging him towards the streets of Konoha, to fulfill his promise to buy him a bowl of ramen. Minato was walking a step back, observing Kushina's hand clinging to the stranger's arm. The yellow lightning clenched his fists. The war had just become much more complicated. The forest near the border with the grass country was dense and silent. The mission was a classic Rankan file of tracking troop movements from Iwagakure, the rock village, that were threatening to outflank Konoha's supply lines. Under the dim moonlight, the temporary team had set up their camp. The fire was sizzling faintly, barely enough to heat the tea, hidden by a visual barrier seal that Minato had placed to avoid detection. Kushina was sitting on a fallen log, laughing out loud. I can't believe you fell into the mud trap of some Kusa genin, she exclaimed, wiping a tear from her eyes. Naruto scratched the back of his neck, smiling with that typical embarrassed expression he hadn't used in years. He had been telling her censored anecdotes from his travels, modifying his real missions with Team 7 to fit his fake story. Hey, the trap was very well hidden, be careful. Naruto defended himself, although he couldn't take his eyes off Kushina's smile. Seeing her so full of life, so happy, made his chest tighten. On the other side of the campfire, Minato Namikaze was sharpening a cradle and three-pointed with a sepulchral silence. His blue eyes, usually warm and calculating, were darkened by a mixture of frustration and jealousy. He had tried to start a tactical conversation with Kushina hours earlier, but she had responded with monosyllables, preferring to listen to the newcomer's noisy stories. The older blonde stuck the cradle and in the dirt and stood up. I'll take the first watch, Minato announced, his tone strictly professional. Kushina, get some rest. Your chakra network is still stabilizing after Kumo's attack. Uzumaki, come with me to the western perimeter. I want to check the cable sensors. Naruto nodded slowly, picking up the tension in the air. He stood up and followed the yellow lightning into the darkness of the trees, leaving Kushina by the fire. They walked in silence for several minutes. The only sound was the rustling of the dry leaves under his ninja sandals. When they were far enough away from the camp, Minato stopped and turned towards him. You are strong, Naruto, Minato began, his voice losing its diplomatic cordiality. Your chakra control is exceptional, and your Ifeinjutsu is master level. Konoha is lucky to have you on our side. But, Naruto suggested, crossing his arms and holding his father's gaze. But I do not know what your real intentions are with her, Minato blurted out, stepping forward, his protective instinct overflowing. Kushina has suffered a lot. He has been the target of enemy villages all his life. I will not allow someone to take advantage of your vulnerability or your need to connect with your lost clan. Naruto felt a twinge of pain. I knew that Minato was saying it from the genuine love he had for Kushina. It was the love that would eventually lead them to get married and give their lives for him. But the human heart is a chaotic battlefield. Naruto's feelings for the redhead had been born before he had fully processed the temporary taboo. And repressing it was becoming a torture. My intentions are to protect her, Naruto replied coldly, lowering his arms. From Kumo, from Iwa. And from anyone who tries to dictate how he should live his life. She is not a weapon of Konoha, Namikaze. He's a person, and it seems I'm the only one who doesn't treat her like a glass vase about to break. Minato narrowed his eyes. The answer had hit right on the target of his own insecurities. Before the older blonde could reply, the instinct of both shinobi shot up simultaneously. The ground beneath his feet shook. "Upstairs!" Minato shouted. They both jumped to the upper branches a fraction of their life. Second before the land they were standing unexploded. 6 sharp rock spikes emerged from the ground with a lethal force of Tonder and Is. Earth element earth spears. From the shadows of the trees, 8 shinobi with Iwagakure's face shields emerged. They had crossed the border. Ambush! Naruto shouted, tracing cruises seal instantly, Kajiban without no jutsu. 4 clones exploded around him, intercepting the first attackers from the rock, who jumped into the branches. Minato wasted no time. He threw 3 of his buckets. There are special ones around the clearing. In a blinding yellow flash, the future 4th Hokage disappeared from his position. The Irasen no Jutsu god of flying thunder sprang into action. In less than 2 seconds, 2 Iwa ninjas fell to the ground with their necks cut, before realizing that the yellow light was their executioner. Naruto, seeing his father's legendary technique live, felt a shiver of admiration. But a massive Iwa ninja pounced on him with his fists wrapped in solid rock. Totang Kengen no Jutsu. Rock fist, roared the enemy, throwing a blow. Pay straight to the head of the blonde miner. Naruto dodged the blow by rotating on his left heel. The inertia of the movement put him in the perfect position. His right hand was raised instinctively, and his chakra began to rotate and condense in his palm. I was forming a Rasengan out of pure memory. Muscular. Brat, stop it. Kurama roared in his mind. Minato is barely inventing that technique at this time. If you use it in front of him, you will destroy the timeline. Naruto suddenly opened his eyes, dissipating the chakra sphere before it took shape. The Iwa ninja, regaining his balance, threw another punch. Without his trademark technique, Naruto turned to his natural affinity. He concentrated wind chakra in his hand, forming a sharp blade of pure air. Tun Shingen. Wind element sword of the void, exclaimed Naruto. With a fluid motion, he cut through the air. The compressed wind not only shattered the enemy's rock armor, but impacted his chest with the force of a gale, violently throwing him against a tree and knocking him unconscious. Before Naruto could take a breath, the Iwa squad leader, seeing that his men were falling, quickly drew seals and rested his hands on the floor of the branch. Doten Yomi Numa. Swamp of the underworld. The earth chakra spread through the forest. The branch that Naruto was standing on suddenly turned into visible mud. Catching his feet, he lost his balance, falling towards the forest floor, which had also been transformed into lethal swamp designed to suffocate its victims. Naruto tried to use chakra on his plants to walk on mud, but the Iwa technique actively absorbed his energy. A cradle and enemy headed straight for his throat while he was trapped. But before the steel touched him, 4 golden chains, glittering and creaking, emerged from the darkness of the forest. 2 chains deflected the weapon, and the other 2 wrapped around Naruto's waist, pulling him with monstrous force to pull him out of the swamp. Naruto flew through the air and landed safely on a solid branch. He turned around. There was Kushina Uzumaki. Her red hair waved like a living flame in the darkness, and her diamond chains flapped around her like snakes ready to attack. Her violet eyes glowed with an implacable fury. "Nobody touches my team, I bane you." The redhead roared. Minato appeared in a yellow flash next to them, cradle and bloodied and frowning, evaluating the new formation. Of the 4 remaining Iwa ninjas. "Excellent reaction time," Kushina, Minato said, putting himself on guard. "Naruto, are you hurt?" "I'm perfect," Naruto replied, unwrapping a crib and impregnating it with wind chakra. Standing shoulder to shoulder with his biological parents. "Let's get these idiots over with." The temporary team was complete, and the rock was about to figure out why messing with Uzumaki's. And the yellow lightning was a death sentence. The forest trembled under the feet of the shinobi. The remaining 4 Iwagakure ninjas, realizing that they were facing the infamous yellow lightning and to enraged Uzumaki's, decided that retreat was not an option. If they were going to die, they would take their enemies with them. The leader of the rock squad bit his thumb, staining his hands with blood, and traced a sequence of stamps so fast that his fingers turned into a blur. His 3 companions placed their hands on his back, transferring his entire chakra to him in a suicidal act of loyalty to their village. Totan Jaramuno Jutsu. Earth Element Golem Jutsu, roared the Iowa leader, hitting the muddy ground with both palms. The earth opened up with a deafening crash. The roots of the ancient trees were uprooted by Rennet, while a solid rock humanoid creature, almost 15 meters high, was boiling in the middle of the forest. His eyes shone with a sinister yellow glow, driven by the combined chakra of the 4 shinobis who fell exhausted to the ground. Minato didn't waste a second. In a yellow flash, he appeared over the shoulder of the immense golem. "I won't let you destroy the forest," Minato exclaimed, sticking 5 explosive tags on the beast's neck before using the Irasen to get back to Kushina and Naruto's side. The explosion was massive, lighting up the night with an orange glow. However, when the smoke cleared, the golem barely had a superficial crack that was quickly closed with more earth from the surroundings. His rock armor was too dense for standard explosives. The monster raised a fist the size of a house and dropped it directly towards the Konoha trio. "Get out of the way!" Kushina shouted. Out of his back, the diamond ceiling chain bolts shot out. 6 thick golden chains were wrapped around the golem's immense rock arm, stopping the blow a few meters from their heads. Kushina gritted her teeth, her boots sinking into the mud from the colossal effort of containing the beast. "It's too heavy, I bane you." The redhead moaned, feeling the golem begin to drag her forward. Minato threw dozens of 3-pointed kunai around the creature, looking for an angle for a lethal attack. But the stone skin rejected the steel. Naruto, seeing Kushina suffer from the effort, knew that basic elementary ninjutsu and kunai would not be enough. He needed pure destructive power. And since he couldn't use the Rasengan without betraying his origin to Minato, he had only one option left. Kurama called Naruto in his mental space, looking into the eyes of the huge orange fox. "Lend me some." Just enough to shatter that stone. The fox growled, a deep warning vibrating in the open cage. "I'm warning you, brat. Using my chakra being so close to the girl. It will have consequences. Our chakras are the same. The rules of this world are not made to withstand a paradox of this magnitude. I can't let her get crushed." "Do it." Naruto closed his eyes. When he opened them, the sky blue had been replaced by a torn, blood red. The whisker marks on his cheeks grew thicker and wilder. A crimson chakra aura, bubbling and dense, erupted around his body. Minato stopped in his tracks as he felt that overwhelming murderous intent. He turned, horrified. I could recognize that sinister chakra anywhere. "Naruto, stop!" Minato shouted, confused and alarmed, that chakra. Ignoring his father, Naruto bent his knees. The earth under his feet cracked from the pressure of the fox's mantle. He shot out towards the golem like a red meteor. "Kushina, let him go!" Naruto roared with a distorted and guttural voice. Kushina retracted her chains just in time. Naruto concentrated the boiling chakra in his right fist and smashed it directly into the stone golem's chest. The impact was not an explosion, it was a devastating shockwave that shattered the structural integrity of the beast. The solid rock shattered into 1,000 pieces, raining debris on the forest as the golem completely collapsed, destroyed by the sheer brute force of the Ninetales. But the triumph lasted less than a second. A heart-rending scream cut through the night. He was not one of the Iowa ninjas. He was from Kushina. The redhead fell to her knees in the mud, clutching her stomach with both hands. Her violet eyes widened, bloodshot. The seal of the 4 symbols on his belly burned through his clothes, as if a red-hot iron had been put on him. The presence of the Kurama chakra released by Naruto had acted as a beacon. The kiwi sealed inside Kushina, enraged and confused at feeling his own chakra signature coming from the outside, began banging on the bars of his prison with an apocalyptic fury. I wanted to get out. He wanted to merge with that energy. A red and toxic chakra aura began to seep uncontrollably from Kushina's body, burning the ground around her. The first queue was forming. Kushina. Minato lunged at her, but the oppressive heat of the demonic chakra forced him back, burning his hands. The seal is resonating. He's losing control. Naruto, realizing the immediate disaster his recklessness had caused, cut off the flow of his own chakra instantly. His eyes turned blue again, and the red cloak disappeared. Without hesitation, he ran to Kushina. He ignored the searing pain her corrosive chakra was producing on his skin as he approached. He knelt down in front of the girl, who was sobbing in pain, losing consciousness as the foxes tried to take over. "Look at me, Kushina, look at me," Naruto pleaded, grabbing her by the shoulders and enduring the burns. "Kurama. Help me stabilize her or she'll die." Following the accelerated instructions of the fox inside, Naruto channeled his own clean, pure and soothing Uzumaki chakra into his hands. He lifted Kushina's shirt, revealing the intricate black seal on her stomach that was now glowing a lethal red. Naruto hit the center of the seal with his 5 fingers infused in unsealed chakra. He turned his hand sharply clockwise, forcing the kanji to tighten. F. In jutsu closes. Of the 4 symbols. Naruto exclaimed. The MRI was cut off completely. The bubbling chakra surrounding Kushina was violently sucked back into her stomach. The girl let out a last trembling sigh and fell unconscious into Naruto's arms. The forest was left in a sepulchral silence, only broken by the sound of the rain falling again. Naruto hugged Kushina's unconscious body against his chest, breathing heavily. His own skin was reddened and blistered from the contact with the demonic chakra, but he didn't care. He had saved her from her own mistake. However, when he looked up, he found the sharp point of a cradle and 3-pronged 1 centimeter from his throat. Minato Namikaze was standing over him. The yellow lightning no longer had the expression of a sympathetic teammate. His blue eyes were cold, unrelenting, and the cradle and in his hand did not tremble at all. "Explain yourself," Minato ordered, his voice dangerously low. "The chakra you used to destroy that golem was exactly the same as that of the Kyuubi, and caused the Kushina label to collapse. What are you really, Naruto? And what connection do you have with the demon that destroyed your clan?" Naruto swallowed hard, caught between the sword of his biological father and the unconscious body of the woman he loved. He realized that half-hearted lies would no longer serve in the world of the shinobi. The forest was plunged into deathly silence, broken only by the dripping of the rain on the charred leaves. Naruto was on his knees in the mud, hugging Kushina's unconscious body with one arm, while the cold blade of Minato Namikaze's crib and 3-pointed 1 brushed his throat. The yellow lightning's gaze was indecipherable. He had witnessed a blonde boy use the darkest and most destructive chakra in the world to save the woman he loved, but in doing so, he almost destroyed her. "I'll ask you just once," Naruto repeated Minato, his voice a lethal murmur, without moving the kunai away. "That red chakra? It was the one with the 9 tails. I have studied the Uzumaki myth seal and the Kushina seal 4 years. You can't replicate that density of pure hate with a simple transformation jutsu. How is it that a survivor of the whirlpool has the chakra of a Biju?" Naruto felt his pulse pounding hard against his throat. Instinct was screaming at her to tell him the truth, to tell him that he was her son, the fox's rightful container in the future. But Kurama, firm inside his mental cell, roared a deafening warning. "If you tell him that you come from the future, and that I am sealed in you by his own hand, you will change his decisions. It won't seal half of my chakra in it, they won't die for you and you will cease to exist, you idiot brat. Lie to him." Naruto's brain processed the warning in a millisecond. I had to come up with an excuse that fit perfectly into the rules. Rules of the shinobi world, an anomaly that would explain his power without altering the timeline. Naruto held Minato's cold gaze. "I'm not a Hinshiriki, Namikaze," Naruto said, his voice steady, though his heart was beating 1,000 times an hour. "The fox with the 9 tails is sealed inside Kushina. I know that since I felt its resonance at the border. By myself. I am a byproduct of his power." Minato frowned, pressing down on the cradle, and 1 more millimeter, drawing a drop of blood from Naruto's neck. Explain yourself. Before Yusio Gakure was destroyed, Naruto began, weaving the lie with scraps of the real story he knew from Kinkaku and Henkaku. There was an incident. The Kyuubi temporarily broke free and wreaked havoc near our village before being recaptured. During the chaos, a group of Kyuumo's renegade ninjas attempted to capture him. And I was part of the collateral damage. Naruto took a breath of air, forcing a pained expression. I was trapped under the rubble, dying from exposure to the toxic fox chakra that had saturated the earth. My father, a ninjutsu master desperate to save me, had no choice. It sealed a residual fraction of that demonic chakra within my own Uzumaki chakra network, forcing my body to assimilate it, so that my healing factor would keep me alive. Minato opened his eyes slightly, taking in the information. The story was far-fetched, but in the shinobi world, Kyuumo's gold and silver brothers had survived in the Ninetail's stomach by eating its flesh and assimilating its chakra. And S-grade ninjutsu to anchor residual chakra in the body of a dying child. It was theoretically possible, especially for the royalty of the Whirlpool country. I am a pseudo-Hinshiriki, Naruto concluded, his voice turning bitter. My chakra network is contaminated for life. I can access a small fraction of the fox's power at critical moments, but it's unstable. I didn't know that using him so close to Kushina would cause a resonance in his main label. I was an idiot. Naruto lowered his gaze to Kushina's pale face. His hands, still reddened from the corrosive chakra burns she had emitted, gently stroked her red hair, pushing it away from her sweaty forehead. The gesture was charged with such genuine tenderness, with such deep regret, that the murderous tension in Minato's posture slowly evaporated. The yellow lightning looked at Naruto's burned hands. The boy had risked his own life by touching Kushina in the full state of chakra boiling, to stabilize the closing of the four symbols. If he was an enemy, he would have let her lose control to destroy the forest himself. With a heavy sigh, Minato pushed the crib away and put it in its cover. It was a reckless act, Uzumaki, Minato said, his tone returning to authority of a squadron captain. That fraction of chakra you possess is a walking danger for Kushina. If you use it near her again, the next time the resonance might break the seal of Mito-sama completely. Naruto nodded, feeling the relief coursing through his body as the lie settled firmly. It won't happen again. I swear on my life, Minato. I will protect Kushina without resorting to that curse. Minato nodded dryly. He knelt down next to them, placing 2 fingers on the redhead's neck to check her pulse. He was strong and steady. The seal was contained again. We have to move, the older blonde ordered, standing up and scanning the perimeter shattered by the rock golem. I was chakra explosion, and yours will have alerted the border patrols within 10 kilometers around. Charge to Kushina. I will cover our retreat and erase our traces. Naruto didn't hesitate. He got to his feet, lifting Kushina in his arms carefully. She was still fast asleep, exhausted by the clash of forces inside her. He rested his head on Naruto's shoulder, and the boy felt a comforting warmth in the midst of the disaster. Although the father she never met distrusted him, at least he hadn't murdered him, and she was safe. Come on, Naruto said, channeling his own pure chakra into his legs. The trio disappeared into the darkness of the forest, jumping from branch to branch at breakneck speed. Minato was in the rear, throwing delayed explosive tags and using cradle and with altered seals to create false wind chakra traces, throwing off the sensors of the rock. They traveled for the rest of the night without stopping. The rain finally dissipated as the sky began to clear, turning a pale blue. Around noon, they arrived at a safe area inside the territory of the Fire Country, an old abandoned outpost of Konoha. Hidden in a rocky valley, Minato secured the perimeter with a barrier seal of Level B, and Naruto laid Kushina down on an old wooden cot covered with survival blankets. The younger blonde sat on the floor, leaning his back against the stone wall, completely exhausted. The forced use of Kurama's cloak, followed by Kushina's healing and high-speed travel. He had been left on the verge of chakra collapse. Minato leaned against the stone door frame, watching Kushina's chest rise and fall rhythmically. Then, his blue gaze drifted to Naruto. Despite the truce, the quiet rivalry was still burning between the two blondes. Your ninjutsu is first-rate for having stabilized a nine-tailed seal in full resonance, Minato commented, crossing his arms. Who taught you how to reverse-rotate the flow locks? Naruto looked up, forcing a crooked smile. I was going to mention Jiraiya, but he stopped in time. Surviving in the world teaches you to read chakra patterns fast, Namikaze. If the flow is positive and destructive, you apply a negative counterforce on the main nodes. It's basic sealing math. Minato raised an eyebrow, intrigued by the technical answer. Before he could inquire further into the boy's anomalous knowledge, a stifled groan interrupted them. Kushina moved on the cot. Her violet eyes opened slowly, unfocused, until they found the blonde figure sitting on the floor in front of her. Naru, muttered Kushina, sitting up awkwardly, rubbing her head. His gaze traveled from him to my born at the door. What happened? The last thing I remember is that giant rock. And then, my stomach burning like hell. Kushina took her hands to the seal, the panic rising in his voice. The fox tried to get out. Don't worry, Kushina, you're safe, Minato said quickly, taking a step towards her. But stopped when he saw that Naruto had already gotten up and was standing next to her. Placing a hand gently on the redhead's shoulder. We contained him in time, Kushina reassured her Naruto, his voice low and soothing, full of a certainty that seemed to anchor her to reality. The seal is intact. The fox only had one tantrum, fuck you. We won't let him hurt you. Kushina looked Naruto in the eye. There was something in her look, in the way her warm hand rested on his shoulder without the slightest hint of fear. That dispelled his panic instantly. The date ballast echoed in his chest again, familiar and comforting. Without thinking, Kushina leaned forward and hugged Naruto tightly, sinking her face into his chest. Thank you, she whispered, her voice trembling with relief. I hate when he tries to take control. I feel like I'm drowning in pure hate. Naruto stiffened for a second, feeling Kushina's heart beating against his. Her arms reacted by instinct, returning the hug, surrounding her with fierce protection. I could smell her hair, rain and pine. The gravitational pull was overwhelming, and the moral timeline was blurring dangerously in his mind. Minato Namikaze, the prodigy of Konoha, stood petrified at the stone door. He watched the scene with an unbearable tightness in his chest. He knew he and Kushina were partners, but the raw, visceral connection she shared with that stranger in just 2 days. It was something he had never managed to build in years of knowing her. The yellow lightning clenched his jaw, turned on his heels, and walked out of the shelter into the daylight, leaving the fox and the fan alone in the dark, trapped in an embrace that threatened to rewrite the history of the ninja world. The return to Konoha was tense and silent. After delivering the mission report to Irizen, the team barely had time to rest before being summoned again. This time, not only the third cage was in the office, but also Jiraiya, the hermit toad, who was watching Naruto with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. After reading the details of the Fenjutsu that the boy had used to stabilize Kushina, a closing of the 4 symbols modified on the fly, Jiraiya muttered, scratching his chin. Your style looks eerily similar to mine, boy. We Uzumaki invented most of those stamps, Jiraiya-sama replied Naruto without flinching, crossing his arms. You just adapted them. Jiraiya let out a hoarse laugh, accepting the answer, although his shinobi instinct was still alert. And Ruzen interrupted the chat, unfolding a map on his desk. Enough of the history. We have an emergency, the Okage announced gravely. A courier from Konoha was intercepted at the border with the country of Rain. He was carrying encryption codes vital to our supply lines. We know that the mercenaries who ambushed him are hiding in a tavern in the suburbs of Amiga. Cure, waiting to sell the information to Iwa. Minato took a step forward, his face turned into a mask of professionalism. Understood, Okage-sama. What is the strategy? If we enter the Rain village with face shields, Inzola Salamandra will take it as an act of war. Exactly, nodded Irizen. That's why it will be a rank infiltration mission to Naruto, and Kushina will enter the village undercover. Your Uzumaki chakra reserves are easy to mask if you suppress them at the civilian level. They will pose as a couple of renegade mercenaries looking for work. Minato, you have the most undetectable chakra of the three. You will be the surveillance in the shadows. If things go wrong, you'll get him out of there with the Gazen. Naruto's mouth went dry, impersonating Kushina's partner. In his mental space, Kurama let out a mocking laugh that echoed throughout his skull. Kushina, on the contrary, smiled enthusiastically, clashing her fists. Easy peasy, man. We'll get that scroll back before they know it, I bane you. Hours later, the perpetually gray sky of the Land of Rain greeted them with a relentless downpour. The landscape was dominated by rusty metal towers and giant pipes that cried water endlessly. Naruto and Kushina were walking through the flooded alleys. They were no longer wearing tactical clothing. Naruto wore a worn gray cape over a dark tunic, and Kushina wore a burgundy travel kimono under a black waterproof cape that barely concealed the shine of her hair. To sell the costume, in a village full of paranoid murderers, they had to act the part. Kushina clung to Naruto's right arm, pressing herself against his side, under the only knowing paper umbrella they shared. The contact was electric for the blonde. He could feel the warmth of her body, the faint scent of jasmine and rain emanating from her hair, and the softness of her hand entwined with his. Naruto swallowed, trying to keep the hard expression of a mercenary, but his heart was beating like a war drum. I knew how dangerous this was. I knew who she was in the original timeline. But in this instant, in the cold rain of a megacure, she was not a distant memory or a ghost of the past. She was a woman of flesh and blood who clung to him with a blind trust. Are you okay, Naru? Kushina whispered, using an improvised nickname to keep the cover, looking at him out of the corner of her eye with a mischievous smile. You're very tense. If a guard sees us this stiff, he'll know we're imposters. You need to relax. To prove her point, Kushina leaned her head against Naruto's shoulder as they walked. The boy's brain almost short-circuited. I'm relaxed, Naruto muttered, forcing his chakra to stay suppressed so it wouldn't give away his nerves. I'm just keeping an eye on the perimeter. On top of a steel tower, camouflaged under a perfect concealment jutsu, Minato Namikaze was watching the scene through the dense rain. The rain hid her tears, but not the stabbing pain in her chest. Seeing Kushina clinging to Naruto's arm, smiling in a way that she rarely dedicated to him, was torture. Minato squeezed the handle of his crib and three-pronged until his knuckles turned white. Her duty was to protect them, but her heart was breaking with every step they took together. Naruto and Kushina arrived at the taverna Target the Iron Toad. The place reeked of cheap shot, black smoke, and dried blood. The room was full of renegade ninjas, deserters, and criminals. They entered in silence. Naruto guided Kushina to a table in a dark corner, keeping his arm around her waist. Of the redhead with a possessive firmness that did not go unnoticed by the thugs of the place. It was the perfect performance of a mercenary protecting his own. They sat together on a wooden bench. Kushina leaned towards him, brushing her lips against Naruto's ear so that no one else would hear her over the noise of the tavern. Her warm breath made Naruto's skin stand on end. Table at 3 o'clock whispers. 3 men. Iowa boots hidden under civilian layers. The one in the middle has a cylindrical lump on his chest. It's the scroll. Naruto nodded imperceptibly, turning his head slightly so that their noses almost brushed, maintaining the facade of a couple whispering intimate secrets to each other. We can't fight in here. There are too many, and we would get Anzo's attention, Naruto replied in a low whisper, his eyes blue. You fix them on Kushina's lips for a split second before looking at the targets. We need you to come out to the alley. I'll provoke them. Get ready to block their escape routes with your chains. Before Kushina could answer, a huge Ronin, covered with scars and past of drinks, approached her table. Her piteous eyes were riveted on Kushina's red hair. Well, you don't see such a fine woman around these dumpsters, the man bellowed, pounding the wooden table with his massive fist. Spilling Naruto's serve. "How much does your bitch charge for an hour of fun, pretty boy?" The entire tavern fell into deathly silence. The Iba ninjas at the nearby table turned their heads, alert. Kushina narrowed her eyes, her volcanic temper on the verge of bursting. She traced a seal under the table, ready to summon a diamond chain and pierce the giant's throat. But Naruto was faster. Without getting up from the chair, the blond man extended his left hand with an imperceptible speed. 2 fingers, loaded with an invisible wind chakra needle, impacted with surgical precision on the vagus nerve of the giant's neck. At the same time, Naruto grabbed the man by the lapel and pulled him forward, smashing his face into the wood of the table with a muffled bang. The Ronin was completely unconscious, with a shattered nose, without even being able to blink. Naruto didn't change his expression. With her right hand, she took her small, untouched serving cup and took a sip, keeping her left arm casually resting on the back of Kushina's bench. The quiet, lethal show of force sent a shiver down the spine of all the criminals present. No one else dared to look at them. Kushina looked at Naruto with wide eyes, her pulse racing. He had been ruthless, efficient, and dark, completely different from the awkward kid who used to joke around at camp. It was the killer instinct of a war veteran. The Iwa ninjas, feeling that the atmosphere had become too dangerous, left some coins on their table, and got up to leave through the back door into the alley. Naruto put the cup down on the table and turned to Kushina. Her blue eyes shone with a cold, calculating intensity. The bait worked. "They're moving," Naruto murmured, taking her hand, interlacing his fingers with hers. "It's time to hunt, Kushi." Kushina nodded, feeling a surge of heat in her chest that had nothing to do with the Kyuubi. They got up together, gliding into the shadows of the tavern's back exit, followed from the heights by a yellow lightning, whose heart weighed more than the Omega Kyururain. The back alley of the El Sapo de Hierro Tavern was a narrow, dark corridor, flanked by rusty pipes spitting dirty water. The rain was falling with deafening force, blotting out any sound of footsteps. The 3 Iwagakure ninjas stopped in their tracks near a dead end. The leader, a burly man with a sodden cloak, turned slowly. His hands were already tracing them. "Did they think that some simple bounty hunters could follow us without us noticing?" growled the Iwa ninja, spitting on the ground. "We'll kill them right here, and let the Omegakure rats take care of their corpses." Naruto and Kushina emerged from the shadows of the tavern. There was no trace of fear in his robots, just the coldness of 2 predators cornering their prey. "The scroll," Naruto said, holding out his hand, his voice sounding deep and threatening in the rain. "Hand him over and maybe he'll let them keep his arms." The Iwa ninjas laughed, but the laughter choked in their throats, when a metallic squeak split the air. From Kushina's back, 4 diamond chains with efsa shot out like golden lightning bolts. They went through the rain and violently wrapped themselves around the ankles and wrists of those of the enemy ninjas, instantly immobilizing them and suppressing their chakra. The leader, surprised by the unsealed S-level jutsu, tried to back up to use an earth jutsu, but Naruto was no longer there. Using the Shunsin no jutsu, the blonde appeared right in the enemy's blind spot. He didn't even use loud jutsu. With a simple cradle and imbued in a very thin layer of wind chakra, Naruto cut the ligaments of the leader's right shoulder. With surgical precision, the man screamed, dropping the sealed cylinder he was hiding in his chest. Naruto caught the scroll in the air before it touched the muddy ground and held it to his face. "Mission accomplished, Kushi." "Let's go," Naruto said, turning to her. But before Kushina could retract her chains, a high-pitched whistle crossed the gray sky. Dozens of kunai with explosive tags rained down on the alley. "Careful!" Naruto shouted. He grabbed Kushina by the waist and pushed her into a rusty balcony. Just as the explosions tore apart the 3 Iwa ninjas and volatilized the alley. Out of the smoke and rain, shadows appeared. They were ninjas with breathing masks, dark armor, and protectors. Front panels with the symbol of 4 vertical lines. The elite assassins of Inzola Salamandra. No one sheds blood in the village of Anzosama without paying the price. Hissed the Omegacure squad leader, kill them. Suten Suiridon no Jutsu. Water element, water dragon jutsu. 3 rain ninjas combined their chakra. The water accumulated in the alley rose, taking the form of an immense and roaring liquid dragon that rushed towards the balcony where Naruto and Kushina were taking shelter. Upstairs, ordered Kushina. The two of them jumped with all their might, shattering the tin roof of the balcony and landing on the slippery roofs of the village, just as the water dragon was tearing apart the building below them. The persecution began. Naruto and Kushina were running at breakneck speed, jumping between cylindrical pipes, metal gargoyles, and sloping roofs. The rain made visibility difficult and made every step a deadly risk. The Omegacure ninjas followed them closely, throwing an incessant rain of senbon needles and shurikens impregnated in poison. There are too many, Naru, Kushina shouted, deflecting a flurry of needles with a cradle, and while running, we can't use massive jutsus or we will destroy the village. And get Anzo's attention. Naruto gritted his teeth. The rules of infiltration were clear, but they were cornered. They came to the edge of a massive tower. In front of them was an abyss of 100 meters, falling towards the dark waters of the city. Behind, 15 Omegacure assassins were closing the circle, preparing lethal water jutsus. Naruto instinctively placed himself in front of Kushina, covering her with his body. He brought his hands to the front and tracing the realm's seal, preparing to summon dozens of clones and force a risky hand-to-hand combat. But before he could accumulate chakra, a yellow lightning bolt tore through the gray sky. Whoops! Minato Namikaze appeared out of nowhere, right in the center of the enemy squad. He had dropped his 3-pointed kunai by parachute during the chase. Moving at a speed that the eyes could not register, the future 4th Hokage teleported between his marks. In less than 3 seconds, 5 rain ninjas fell to the ground, their necks slashed with chilling precision. The others, terrified by the appearance of the mythical yellow lightning, broke ranks and retreated. Minato did not pursue them. He appeared again, this time in front of Naruto and Kushina. He grabbed both of them by the shoulders. Hold on tight, he ordered. The world turned and compressed. When Naruto opened his eyes, they were no longer in the middle of the acid rain of the village, but inside a dry and dark cave. Several kilometers from Omegacure, at an extraction point that Minato had previously marked. All 3 fell to the ground, panting. Minato released Kushina immediately, maintaining his professional stance. The scroll? Do you have it? Minato asked, his breathing slightly agitated by the multiple use of the Gazen. Naruto pulled the cylinder out of his cloak and handed it to him without saying a word. Minato took it, verifying Konoha's seal of authenticity before storing it in his vest. Mission accomplished, Minato declared, though his voice lacked any cheerfulness. She turned to Kushina, her blue eyes softening. Kushina, you're hurt. I saw the explosion in the alley and the water dragon. They shouldn't have risked so much. Minato took a step towards her, pulling out a dry towel from a storage scroll to give it to her. But Kushina did not look at him. Her attention was completely fixed on the boy next to her. Naru, she exclaimed, hastily kneeling down next to Naruto, ignoring the towel Minato offered her. Naruto had been leaning against the cave wall, grimacing in pain. An Omegacure senbon, hidden in the rain, had dug deep into his left shoulder during the escape. A dark, purplish blood stain was spreading across his cloak. Poison. I'm fine, Kusi. It's just a scratch, Naruto muttered, trying to tear off his needle, but the vision was nullified for a second. Don't be an idiot, don't move. Kushina scolded him, her hands shaking slightly as she channeled green chakra senjutsu over the wound to neutralize the toxin. The poison of rain is neurotoxic. If it spreads, it will stop your heart. Why did you stand in front of me in the tower? I could block it myself, I bane you. Because it's my job to protect you, Naruto replied, his voice becoming hoarse. He looked into her eyes, losing himself in the deep violet that reflected a pure and absolute concern for him. And why wouldn't I let anything hurt you? Never. Kushina felt the air leaving her lungs. Their faces were just inches apart. The warmth emanating from Naruto under her hands was not the ardor of the fox, but the comforting warmth of a boy willing to die for her. Kushina absently brushed Naruto's cheek with her thumb, pushing a damp blonde lock away from his face. Minato was watching the scene from the shadows of the cave, the towel still outstretched in his hand, completely ignored. The pain in the chest of the future Hokage had nothing to do with war wounds. It was the cold, humiliating edge of rejection. He had crossed enemy lines, he had killed 5 ninjas in seconds to save her, but for her, he was just the transport. The hero of the story of Kushina Uzumaki was that stranger with marks on his cheeks. Minato squeezed the towel until it almost tore. His blood boiled, not because of duty, but because of a primal and territorial instinct that he never thought he possessed. Enough is enough, Minato's voice echoed in the cave, cold, hard and cutting as ice, surprising both of them. The yellow lightning put the towel away and took 2 steps towards them, casting a heavy shadow on the younger blonde. Kushina, get away from him. Your Uzumaki healing chakra can clear the poison on its own in a few minutes, Minato ordered, adopting his rank of captain. Uzumaki Naruto. In the village alley, you acted on your own, breaking the formation and exposing your companion to an Omegacure secondary ambush. Naruto tensed up. The poison nullified his senses, but Minato's tone was unmistakable. I wasn't demanding ninja tactics from him, I was setting a personal limit, disguised as a military reprimand. I secured the target, Captain. Naruto replied with the same coolness, holding the murderous gaze of his own biological father. And Kushina and I had the situation under control. Being surrounded on a cliff by 15 elite ninjas is not having the situation under control, Minato replied, leaning slightly towards him. You're being reckless, Naruto. And your recklessness will put Kushina in danger. I'm not going to allow it. Kushina jumped to her feet, getting between the two. Her red hair began to float in the air, charged with static and fury. Don't you dare talk to him like that, my Namikaze motto. The redhead screamed, he risked his life to get me out of the alley, just like you. Stop treating him like he's the enemy, and stop treating me like I'm a helpless princess that you need to rescue. The silence that followed was thunderous. Minato looked at Kushina, the pain shining in his blue eyes for a split second before hiding it under his shinobi mask. He nodded slowly. As orders, cook. We'll rest here for an hour until the poison leaves his system. Then, we will return to Konoha to deliver the scroll. Minato turned around and walked towards the cave entrance, sitting with his back to them to keep an eye on the rain. He was one step away from losing control of his emotions, and the yellow lightning never lost control. Naruto closed his eyes, resting his head on the stone wall. Her heart was broken. He had saved Kushina, yes, but in doing so, he was destroying her parents' relationship in real time. The timeline screamed in pain, and the paradox threatened to devour him alive. The return to Konoha was marked by an unbearable silence. After delivering the scroll to the Okage Tower, Minato Namikaze said goodbye with a stiff bow. Claiming that he had to write the final report alone, he did not look Kushina in the eyes. It disappeared in a yellow flash, leaving a cold void in the office. Kushina frowned, annoyed and confused by the older blonde man's attitude, but quickly focused. Focus on Naruto. The Omegacure poison had been neutralized, but the boy's shoulder was still stiff and he needed proper medical treatment. With a tale that they did not carry on the field. You're coming with me, Kushina ordered, grabbing him by the sound sleeve and pulling him through the streets of Konoha in the evening light. Naruto did not resist. He allowed himself to be guided to an apartment complex in the quietest sector of the village. Upon entering Kushina's home, Naruto's heart sank. The walls were full of scrolls, scattered brushes and diagrams of incomplete ninjutsu. She smelled of fresh ink and that jasmine scent that he liked so much. It was a chaos, but a warm and full of life chaos. Sit there and take off your cloak, she indicated, pointing to a cushion on the floor next to a low wooden table. As she went to the bathroom to get her medicine cabinet, Naruto obeyed, letting himself fall heavily. He removed his cloak and top robe, leaving his left shoulder and part of his torso exposed. The scars of his battles, future marks of Kune, burns of his elemental jutsus, adorned his skin. A map of a war that had not yet happened. Kushina returned with bandages and a jar of a green duento. Seeing Naruto's scars, his violet eyes softened with a deep sadness. She knelt down behind him. "You say you lost your family in the whirlpool," she murmured, smearing the healing balm on her fingers and gently applying it on the wound of the senbon. "But these scars? You've been living in a constant hell, Naru." The contact of his cold fingers on Naruto's hot skin made him shudder. The residual chakra in the ointment began to numb the pain, but Kushina's touch lit a completely different fire inside her. "The ninja world is not kind to those who are alone," Kushi replied Naruto, his voice low, looking straight ahead. "You survive, you get strong, and you keep going. It's the only way." Kushina stopped the movement of her hands. Silence filled the small room. Slowly, the redhead moved until she was sitting in front of him, shortening the distance between her knees. Her eyes were fixed on his, shining with an intensity that made Naruto forget how to breathe. "My motto is the most brilliant ninja I know. He always saves me, he always does the right thing," Kushina whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "But when he looks at me, sometimes I feel that he sees the 9 tails or a village duty that he must protect. When you look at me, Naruto, I feel like you only see me." Kushina raised a hand, her fingers brushing the whisker marks on the blonde man's cheek. "It makes me feel safe, I bane you. As if nothing in this world could hurt me while you're here." The distance between them was reduced to centimeters. Naruto was hypnotized. The love he felt for her, a love that had mutated from a distant admiration to a devastating attraction, was about to overflow. All her instinct was screaming at her to shorten that last centimeter, to seal that moment, to reclaim that happiness. That fate had always denied her. He closed his eyes and leaned forward. He could feel the warmth of Kushina's lips millimeters from his own. And then, all hell broke loose inside her. "Stop, you stupid brat." Kurama's roar was so deafening that Naruto's mental space seemed to crack. The murky waters under the fox's cage stirred violently. Naruto suddenly opened his eyes, panting. But it was not the cry of the fox that paralyzed him. It was what was happening to his own body. His left hand, the one resting on his knee, was blinking. The normal flow of his chakra network, visible to his own senses, was becoming translucent. A feeling of absolute cold, the cold of emptiness, began to creep from his fingers to his chest. "Look at you," Kurama growled, his voice vibrating with a genuine panic that Naruto had never heard before. "Time is not a genjutsu that you can dispel. If you kiss her, if you alter the feeling that binds her to the yellow lightning, you will erase the reason for your own existence. The thread is being cut, Naruto. You're fading away." The horror took hold of Naruto. The paradox had caught up with him. It wasn't just his life that was at stake. If he disappeared now, there would be no one in the future to stop Madara, to save the Fourth War. And worst of all, if he took Minato's place, his parents' sacrifice would never happen. And Kushina would live a lie that would inevitably collapse. Kushina, with her eyes closed and her face slightly tilted, was waiting for the brush. With a superhuman effort, as if he were ripping his own heart out of his chest, Naruto pulled back, breaking the contact abruptly. He jumped to his feet, backing up until he hit the wall of the apartment. The flickering in his hand stopped. His chakra stabilized again, heavy and painful. He had survived, but the emotional toll was devastating. Kushina opened her eyes, blinking, confusion and vulnerability painted on her face. She put a hand to her chest, hurt by the sudden rejection. "Naruto." "What?" he stammered, his voice breaking. "No. We can't." Kushina was interrupted by Naruto, his voice harsh, forcing his throat to utter words that were killing him inside. "Me? I'm not the man you think I am. I don't care who you are," she exclaimed, getting to her feet, her Uzumaki temper surfacing to cover the pain of her wounded pride. "You're the only one who's not afraid of me. Why are you walking away? Are the scars you're talking about stronger than this? Naruto clenched his fists, digging his nails into his palms until he drew blood. I had to be cruel to save her. I had to push her towards her true destiny. Because Minato is the one who really loves you, damn it, Naruto snapped, using a harsh, cutting tone he'd never used with her. He is the future of this village. He is the one who will protect you when I have to leave. My road is full of blood and darkness, Kitchen. I'm not going to drag you to him. You belong to the light. You belong with him. Kushina was frozen. The words were like knives digging into his chest. The rejection was absolute, disguised as a noble sacrifice that she had not asked for. Her violet eyes filled with tears of rage and disappointment. You're a coward, Uzumaki. Naruto, she whispered, her voice trembling with anger. Get out of my house. Get out. Naruto didn't say anything else. I couldn't. If he opened his mouth, he risked telling the truth and destroying everything. He grabbed his cloak from the ground, threw it over his shoulders, and went out. Through the window into the Konoha night. As it fell on the neighboring roof, the rain began to fall again on the village. Naruto fell to his knees on the tiles, clutching his chest. The physical pain of the almost paradox had vanished, but the pain in his soul was 100 times worse. He had just shattered his own mother's heart to secure her birth, and in the process, he had shattered his own. You did well, brat, Kurama muttered into the darkness of his mind, a tone of unusual respect in his voice. You saved the future. I don't care about the future, Kurama. Naruto thought, the tears mixing with the cold rain. I just want her to be happy. It had been 3 weeks since the mission in Omegacure. 3 weeks since Naruto broke his own heart to save the timeline. The atmosphere in the temporary team was icy. Kushina had built an impenetrable wall between her and Naruto. During training and border patrols, he barely spoke to her, limiting himself to strictly tactical communications. Her violet eyes, which had looked at him with overwhelming warmth before, now only reflected a resentment. I'm lying hurt. Minato, for his part, watched this dynamic with a mixture of relief and confusion. He didn't understand what had happened between them that night in Konoha. But the Yellow Lightning's instinct told him that the blonde stranger was suffering as much as Kushina. Even if he hid it under one more face of indifference. One cloudy afternoon, while Minato and Naruto were delivering a report at the Okage Tower, a massive disturbance shook the time traveler's senses. Naruto stopped in his tracks in the middle of the hallway. Inside, Kurama stirred violently, growling against the bars of his cage. Brat. The fox's voice rang out urgently. The chakra of my other half has shot up for a second, full of panic, and now it has completely disappeared. Someone has blocked your chakra network with a effin' jutsu of your high-level pressure. Naruto's eyes widened. Kushina, he exclaimed, ignoring the Chunin who were passing through the corridor. Minato turned quickly, his expression instantly turning lethal. What's the matter, Uzumaki? She was on her day off, training at the North Zone camp. He's not there anymore, Naruto said, tracing the tiger's seal and closing his eyes to expand his senses to the fullest. His chakra signature has suddenly vanished. It is not a simple jutsu of concealment, it is a seal of total containment. Someone took her away. Minato asked no questions. He relied on Naruto's sensory abilities. In a yellow flash, he grabbed the boy's shoulder and they both disappeared from the hallway, reappearing in the North training camp. Thanks to a crib, and marking that Minato had left there days ago. The clearing was wrecked. There were craters on the ground, burn marks and splintered trees, evidence that Kushina had fought fiercely. But what froze Minato's blood was a small piece of black parchment burned on the floor, covered with red kanjis. Minato picked it up, clenching his jaw. A root suppression seal. Naruto clenched his fists. He remembered Danzo Shimura's icy gaze the day he arrived at the village. The old war hawk had not given up. He had taken advantage of Naruto's estrangement and Kushina's emotional isolation to attack when she let her guard down. Danzo wants the Ninetales, Naruto growled, his blue eyes burning with a murderous fury. He wants to turn it into a weapon without wool, or worse, to transfer the bijulo to one of his pawns. Minato stood up, his white cloak billowing in the cold breeze. The yellow lightning had never looked so terrifying. The root base is in the lower levels of the village, an unmapped labyrinth and protected by dozens of elite ambu. If we break in by force, it will be considered treason against a Konoha advisor. It could spark a civil war. Naruto pulled out a crib and spun it in his hand. I don't give a damn about the politics of this village, Namikaze. I'm going to get down there and I'm going to smash anyone who gets between her and me. If you don't want to tarnish your reputation as a perfect hero, stay here. Naruto turned around to leave, but Minato's hand stopped him, grabbing his arm with a steely force. Naruto looked at him, ready to fight his own father if necessary. But what he saw in Minato's eyes wasn't the doubt of a rule-abiding shinobi. It was the same pure, uncontrollable rage that he felt himself. Don't you dare doubt what she means to me, Uzumaki. Minato hisses, his voice charged with an unusual darkness. I love her. I would give my life for her without a second thought. So listen well, we'll go in together. You'll be the hammer and I'll be the scalpel. No one will die, to prevent Airazan from having to execute us, but we will incapacitate them all. Understood. Naruto felt a lump in his throat as he heard Minato's confession. It was the irrefutable truth of the timeline. He nodded, forcing a sharp smile. Roger that, Captain. Let's show why we are the most lethal team in Konoha. Both blondes disappeared in a blur of speed. Minutes later, in the dark sewers below Konoha, 2 Root Foundation guards wearing porcelain masks stood guard in front of an immense, sealed metal door. With F in jutsu. They didn't hear anything. They didn't feel anything. Suddenly, a clone of Naruto's shadow fell from the ceiling directly between them. F Tonda and Toppa. Wind element, big break. A blast of compressed air at point-blank range crashed the 2 Zambuko against the stone walls, stunning them. Before they could react or raise the alarm, Minato materialized in front of them. With 2 precise blows to the base of the neck, he disconnected their nervous systems, rendering them unconscious. Naruto, the original, landed in front of the heavy door. Of metal. He evaded the security seals. It was a blocking matrix that would require Danzo's chakra signature to open. Kill her, Minato ordered Naruto, taking a step back. Minato understood instantly. He nailed one of his 3-pointed kyuune straight down the middle of the steel door. Naruto channeled wind chakra into his right hand, creating a vibrating blade of hyper-compressed air. With a stifled scream, Naruto slammed his hand into the door, cutting the steel and seals like wet paper, creating a hole the perfect size for a man to pass through. Minato didn't wait for the metal to fall. Using the mark of his crib, and teleported directly inside the secret room. Naruto ran in a second later. The scene they found made the blood of both serve. It was an underground chamber and lumina by torches. In the center, on a stone altar covered with restrictive sealing formulas, stood Kushina. He was unconscious, his wrists and ankles held by chakra shackles that suppressed his energy. In front of her, Danzo Shimura was holding a thick brush, about to paint a seal of the curse, directly on the redhead's forehead to bend her will. 5 Ambu de Ra-Z surrounded him as bodyguards. Get away from her, Danzo. Minato roared, his voice echoing throughout the cavern. Danzo didn't even flinch. His one eye looked at the 2 intruders with contempt. Youth is impulsive. Minato Namikaze, you are committing treason. This woman is Konoha's ultimate weapon, and her unstable emotions are an unacceptable risk. I will give him the purpose that Airazan is too weak to impose on him. Kill them. The 5 Ambus launched into the attack. But Danzo seriously underestimated the combined fury of 2 of the deadliest shinobi in history. Minato threw a handful of kyuune that were scattered all over the room. The yellow lightning turned into an unpredictable storm of light. It would appear, hit a vital spot to incapacitate, and disappear again before the blood even touched the ground. 2 Zambu fell in less than 3 seconds. The other 3 tried to corner Naruto, using their combined fire and wind jutsus to incinerate him. Naruto didn't dodge. He traced the seal of Cruz. Tajuka Jeben without no jutsu. Multi-clone shadow jutsu. 50 Naruto clones filled the room in a massive smoke explosion. Root's numerical superiority was crushed in an instant. The clones pounced on the Ant, using pure Uzumaki taijutsu to disarm and knock them out based on pure brute and overwhelming force. Seeing that his bodyguards were falling uselessly, Danzo dropped the brush and quickly traced stamps. F. Tenshinka. The wind element or the vacuum element. Danzo exhaled an immense blade of cutting wind designed to split in half everything it found in its path. The technique destroyed dozens of Naruto clones in an instant, sweeping the room. But when the wind died down, Danzo realized his fatal mistake. I had lost sight of the real Naruto. You were looking for an Uzumaki, old man. Naruto shouted, plummeting from the roof of the cavern, right on top of Danzo. In his right hand, Naruto had formed a sphere of rotating, condensed and destructive chakra. The promise not to use it in front of Minato had been forgotten at the sight of Kushina chained. It was the Rasengan. Danzo opened his eye wide, trying to raise his arms to protect himself, but the speed of the fall was unstoppable. Naruto crashed the Rasengan directly into Danzo's chest. He didn't do it with full lethal force, but the spinning impact shattered the counselor's ribs and sent him flying violently against the stone wall at the bottom of the cave, leaving him buried in the rubble and instantly incapacitated. The sepulchral silence reigned again in the underground chamber. Minato stood in the center of the room, his white cape immaculate despite the chaos. He looked at Danzo embedded in the wall, and then his eyes fixed on the fading technique in Naruto's hand. It was a sphere of pure manipulation of form. It was the technique that he himself had been trying to perfect for 3 years and had not yet managed to complete. How was it possible that this guy had her dominated? But the questions would have to wait. Naruto ran to the altar and started ripping the chakra shackles off the kitchen dolls using his bare hands wrapped in cutting wind. Minato quickly approached, helping him to free her. Between the two of them, they lifted the redhead very carefully. Kushina opened her eyes slowly, coughing weakly. Her blurry vision focused on the two blonde faces bending over her, both filled with agonized worry. Minato. Naru. She whispered, her voice barely a thread of air. We're here, Kushina. It's over, Minato assured her, gently stroking her red hair. Naruto swallowed the lump in his throat, taking a half step back to let Minato take control of the situation. Fulfilling his painful proposal. Promised to step aside. The rescue had been an absolute success, but the deployment of the Rasengan had ignited a time bomb. In the mind of the future fourth Hokage, the time traveler's secret was hanging by a thread. The Konoha hospital was silent under the moonlight. In a high-security room, guarded by a barrier seal that the third Kage himself had placed, Kushina Uzumaki was resting deeply. Irizen had ordered the temporary disbandment of Danzo's operations after discovering the attempted kidnapping. But the tension in the village was palpable. In the hallway, outside the room, the atmosphere between Minato and Naruto was so dense that it could be cut with a wind sword. Minato looked at Naruto through the gloom. Come with me to the roof. We need to talk. Naruto didn't argue. She followed the yellow lightning in silence, up the stairs to the roof of the hospital, where the cold night wind ruffled her blonde locks. From there, the stone faces of the three Hokages watched them in silence. As soon as the door closed behind him, a three-pointed crib whistled past within a millimeter of Naruto's cheek. Sticking into the radio antenna behind him, Naruto didn't blink. I knew that Minato didn't fail unless he wanted to. I've been trying to perfect that technique for 3 years, Minato said, his voice lacking any warmth, turning around to face the boy. 3 years trying to take the chakra shape manipulation to its absolute limit. It's a jutsu that doesn't even have a name yet, classified as a rank secret to my own mind. Minato took a step forward, the intensity of his blue eyes riveting on the stranger. And you, a so-called refugee who appeared out of nowhere, created a perfect spinning chakra sphere in a second to crush Danzo. No more lies, Uzumaki. Who are you and who taught you my technique? Naruto lowered his gaze, the wind blowing his cape. The lump in his throat was unbearable. For weeks he had been carrying the weight of the paradox, destroying his own feelings and those of Kushina to maintain the farce. But in front of the analytical mind of the future Fourth Eye, the wall had collapsed. It's game over, Kurama, Naruto thought, feeling infinite exhaustion. In the darkness of his mind, the immense nine-tailed fox sighed heavily, lowering his head on his paws. It doesn't matter anymore, brat. You've saved their relationship. You've protected the girl. The thread of time is strong enough now. Tell her the truth. Naruto looked up. Her blue eyes met Minato's, and for the first time since she arrived at this time, she dropped all her barriers. No more cold mercenary expressions, no more defensive sarcasm. He only showed the look of a boy who had lost his whole world in a war. Jutsu is called Rasengan, Naruto replied, his voice trembling slightly. It's an upgrade technique that takes months to master, and one day will be the legacy of a hero who saved this village by sacrificing his own life. Minato frowned, confused by the tone of the reply. Whose legacy? Who taught you that? Naruto smiled with an overwhelming sadness. The tears she had been holding back for weeks finally gathered in her eyes. You taught me that. Dad. The wind seemed to stop on the roof. The silence was absolute. Minato froze, his bright brain refusing to process the word he had just heard. He looked at the spiky blonde hair, identical to his own. He looked at the blue eyes, the exact same shade as the ones he saw in the mirror every morning. And then he thought about the unwavering tenacity, massive life force and stubbornness that the guy shared with Kushina. That's impossible, Minato stammered, taking a step back, his guard completely dropping. The cradle and in his hand trembled. Time travel is a discarded theory. Forbidden injutsus that exist only in mythological scrolls of Utsusio Gakure. A forbidden injutsu powered by Kurama's chakra, on the verge of death in the Fourth Ninja World War, confirmed Naruto. Taking a step towards the moonlight, he lifted his shirt, revealing the seal of the 8 trigrams on his stomach, a work, master of sealing, that far surpassed that of Mito Uzumaki. Minato gasped at the sight of the seal. He recognized his own calligraphic style. It was his own chakra signature in that matrix. I'm not a pseudo-Hinchiriki, Naruto continued, tears streaming down his cheeks. I am the container of the yan half of the nine-tailed fox. You sealed it inside me the day I was born. The day when you and Mom. The day you and Kushina gave their lives to protect me from the devil. Minato felt his knees go weak. The yellow lightning, the terror of nations in enemies, fell to his knees on the roof, covering his mouth with one hand. All the pieces fit together with terrifying precision. The resonance of the Kyuubi at the border. The impossible knowledge of stamps. And above all, the pain. Naruto's grief and despair at rejecting Kushina in his apartment. For heaven's sake. Minato whispered, the guilt hitting him like a mountain of rock. He looked at Naruto, finally seeing the injured boy behind the soldier. Kushina. The way you looked at her, the way you protected her. And me. I threatened you. I was jealous of my own son. Naruto wiped his tears with his sleeve, letting out a choked and bitter laugh. I don't blame you. The Uzumaki chakra. The blood pulls hard. When I saw her in the border forest, I didn't know who she was. I grew up an orphan, I never saw clear photos of her. I just felt this absolute need to protect her, to be by her side. It took me days to realize the temporary atrocity I was in. Naruto knelt down in front of Minato, looking into his eyes with a maturity that no teenager should have. That's why I had to take her away, Dad. That's why I had to break his heart that night. If she clung to me, you two would never be together. I would never be born. And there would be no one in the future to stop the nightmare I escaped from. I had to be the villain so you guys could be the heroes. My son couldn't take it anymore. She shortened the distance and wrapped her son in a desperate and crushing hug. He sank his face into Naruto's shoulder, closing his eyes tightly as the weight of this boy's sacrifice crushed him. Naruto had borne the fate of the world, had endured the hatred of the woman who gave him life, everything to save them all. Naruto closed his eyes and returned the hug with force. It was the first time in his life that his father had hugged him. The heat was real. The tears of Minato wetting his shoulder were real. For a whole minute, on the rooftop of Konoha, time ceased to matter. They were just a father and a son that fate had crossed in the storm. "You are an amazing shinobi," Naruto murmured Minato, breaking away slightly and grabbing his son's face with both hands. Looking at him with immense pride. "What you have sacrificed. Your strength, your will of fire. It is brighter than that of any occasion." Naruto forced a smile, feeling a weight of tons lifted from his shoulders. But the moment of peace was shattered by the high-pitched and terrifying sound of Konoha's alarm sirens. An orange burst lit up the northern horizon. The sensory barrier of the village had been breached. Minato stood up instantly, his captain's instincts taking over. He looked up at the smoke rising in the distance. "Iwagakure and Kumogakure," Minato said, gritting his teeth. "They have made a temporary alliance. They know that Konoha is dealing with internal conflicts after Danzo's betrayal, and they are launching a full-scale attack." Naruto wiped away the last tears and stood up, his face returning to the mask of a ruthless soldier. His blue eyes flashed with the determination of the fox. "Not on our turn, Dad," Naruto said, pulling out a crib and covering it with wind chakra. "Kushina is safe in that room. We'll take care of the front." Minato pulled out his crib and three-pointed, nodding with a fierce smile that was identical to his son's. "Let's do it, Naruto. Let's show them the power of the yellow lightning and the hero of the future." Both blondes disappeared from the rooftop in a burst of speed and light, ready to face an entire army to protect the village and their family's future. The night over Konoha had turned an apocalyptic red. Alarms were howling as the village's northern walls gave way to the incessant shelling. The temporary alliance between Iwagakure and Kumogakure had mobilized thousands of shinobi. Taking advantage of the darkness and distraction of the Third Cage's internal conflicts with the Root Foundation. In the center of the battlefield, just outside the destroyed walls, the Konoha defense squadrons were being massacred. But the real nightmare was just beginning. The earth shook unnaturally. Two huge figures stood up among the smoke and debris, summoned by the Iwa forces. They were and are the Hinchirikis of the Five Tails Goku and the Four Tails Son Gok, respectively. Both had released their full transformations, a gigantic white fin horse and a colossal red-furred gorilla wrapped in burning lava. Vijudama? Beast ball with tail. The huge lava gorilla roared, opening its jaws. Red and blue chakra particles began to condense at a terrifying speed in front of his mouth, forming a black sphere of lethal density aimed directly at the monument of suckling. If that attack hit, half of Konoha would disappear from the map. The Leaf Ninjas fell to their knees, paralyzed by the crushing pressure of the Bija's chakra. Suddenly, a three-pointed cradle crossed the air and stuck into the earth, right in the path of the destructive sphere. A yellow flash lit up the night. Minato Namikaze appeared with his arms outstretched. He traced a seal at a blurry speed. Its raise anger. Jutsu Flying Thunder God Thunder Guide. A space-time barrier opened in front of Minato. The immense Vijudama of the Four Tails hit her, and, in an instant, she was teleported 5 kilometers away, exploding in the mountains with a rumble that made the foundations of the village vibrate. The shinobi of Konoha cheered at the sight of their hero, but the joy was short-lived. The five-tailed charged forward, its massive horns covered in boiling steam, aiming directly at Minato, who had not yet caught his breath. After the space jump. But before the white monster could crush the yellow lightning, a deafening gale swept the battlefield. An orange and yellow blur fell from the sky like a meteor. There were no stamps. There were no warnings. Just an explosion of pure and absolute chakra. Naruto Uzumaki landed in front of his father, and the whole world seemed to stop. He no longer wore the mercenary's gray, ragged cloak. His entire body radiated a golden and blinding light. A mantle of burning chakra, adorned with the black magatamas of the six paths, completely covered him. The marks on her cheeks had grown thick and wild. It was the Ninetales chakra mode. Kurama. Naruto roared. In his headspace, the huge orange fox slammed his fist into that of his container. Show them the power of the future, Brad. Naruto held out both hands. Gigantic golden chakra arms shot out from his back and grabbed the horns of the Five Tails in full charge. The impact generated a shockwave that uprooted the trees, but Naruto did not retreat an inch. With a scream that blended his voice with the fox's guttural roar, Naruto lifted the giant Bijulu into the air and slammed him to the ground with seismic force. The battlefield was plunged into a sepulchral silence, broken only by the crackling of the fire. Shinobi from Iwa, Kumo, and Konoha were gawking at the golden figure who had just knocked down a tailed beast with his bare hands. Minato, standing behind him, was watching his son's back with a pride that overflowed his chest. That was the boy he and Kushina would give their lives for. That was his legacy. But they weren't the only ones watching. On the roof of the Konoha hospital, several kilometers away, Kushina Uzumaki had just been awakened by the explosions. She had crawled up to the roof, still weak, and her violet eyes opened with indescribable horror and fascination as she saw the golden glow on the horizon. In his stomach, the seal of the four symbols throbbed. The Kyuubi of the past, locked inside, opened his immense red eyes. That chakra, snarled the fox inside Kushina, his voice echoing in the redhead's mind with a mixture of confusion and fury. It's me, but it's not me. That brat. He is using my power without an iota of hatred. What witchcraft is this? Kushina grabbed the railing on the roof. Naruto? She whispered, remembering how he had steadied her seal, how he had healed her. Suddenly, everything made sense. That strength, that blind trust, that promise to protect her. He was not a simple refugee of Uchiha Gakure. Back on the battlefield, the Four Tails, furious at seeing his comrade knocked down, began to accumulate another Vijudama. This time even larger, channeling all the magma of his body. At the same time, the Five Tails rejoined, opening its mouth to do the same. A combined attack would destroy Minato's seal before he could teleport it. Minato, back up. Naruto commanded, his voice echoing with a divine authority that would not admit of retort. The yellow lightning nodded, fully trusting his son, and teleported towards the defense lines to protect the injured. Naruto was left alone in front of the two massive beasts. He clasped his hands together, the golden chakra swirling around him in a cyclone of light. I'm not going to let them destroy the home where I was born, Naruto said quietly. He raised a hand above his head. The wind began to howl. On his right palm, a Rasengan instantly formed, but it didn't stop there. The wind chakra expanded, forming four navel-like sharp blades, which were spinning at supersonic speed, emitting a deafening hum that eclipsed the sound of war. F1. Lady Raisin Shuriken. Super large wind element Raisin Shuriken. The forbidden technique, perfected in the battles of the future, lit up the night like a second sun. The two-tailed beasts shot their immense combined Bijudamas at him. Naruto launched his Rasen Shuriken with an earth-shaking roar. The immense wind shuriken collided head-on against the two dense chakra spheres in the center of the battlefield. For a microsecond, the forces were balanced. And then, the masterpiece of the wind showed why it was the pinnacle of elementary manipulation. The wind blades cut the density of the Bijudamas, destabilizing them from the molecular core. The resulting explosion was not one of destruction, Nigna, but an immense dome of cutting wind and white light that enveloped the two enemy Hinchiriquis. The sharp chakra penetrated their defenses, severing their energy networks at the microscopic level, forcing them out of their full transformations and leaving them unconscious at the bottom of a crater. Gigantic. The light faded slowly. Naruto, still wrapped in his golden cloak, floated down to the edge of the crater. I wasn't tired. Kurama's chakra was beating in perfect sync with his. He looked at the enemy army, which was retreating in terror before. The vision of the golden god of Konoha. They didn't need any more convincing. Iwa and Kumo had lost their weapons of mass deterrence in a single move. The retreat began instantly. Minato appeared next to him in a flash, resting a hand on his son's shoulder. "It's over," Naruto said, the future Hokage, his voice filled with a reverential respect. "You have saved Konoha." The younger blonde nodded, undoing the Kyuubi's chakra mode. The golden light faded, leaving him back in his dark clothes, looking like just a human teenager in the face of the immensity of the destruction. However, his gaze was not on the fleeing enemies. She was fixed in the distance, on the roof of the Konoha hospital, where a small red-haired figure was watching the horizon, with his heart beating 1,000 times an hour. Kushina knew that. He didn't understand how or from where, but he felt the truth in his own blood and in the resonating chakra of the fox inside. Uzumaki Naruto was not her lover. It was a miracle woven in time. It was his son. The battlefield was plunged into a reverential silence. The forces of Iwa and Kumo fled in terror on the horizon, while the Konoha ninjas began to assimilate that they had survived the impossible. In the center of the immense crater, the golden light that enveloped Naruto began to flicker. It was not the flicker of a technique running out of chakra. It was something much deeper and scarier. The edges of his body became translucent, as if they were made of stardust, scattering in the night wind. The Kyuubi's massive release of power had overloaded the temporal Jutsu that kept him anchored at that time. The paradox had finally come to collect its debt. Minato Namikaze took a step forward, her blue eyes widening in horror as she saw her son's hand turn transparent. "Naruto!" Minato exclaimed, reaching over and trying to grab him by the shoulder, but his fingers partially pierced the fabric of the cloak. "Your chakra? He is fading from the physical plane." Naruto looked at his own hand, giving a tired but genuine smile. The pain was gone, replaced by a feeling of absolute weightlessness. "Time's up, Dad," Naruto whispered, his voice sounding with a distant echo. "I pushed the seal too hard when using the chakra mode. The timeline is correcting itself. He's bringing me back to where I belong." Before Minato could respond, the sound of sandals frantically hitting the shattered floor caught his attention. It was Kushina. She had jumped from the rooftops of Konoha, ignoring the pain of her injuries, guided only by the undeniable tug in her own blood, and the confused roar of the ninetales inside her. She landed on the crater rim, her breathing labored, and her red hair billowing in the wind. His violet eyes found Minato, but quickly focused on the bright, translucent figure of Naruto. Kushina walked slowly towards him. The tears were already streaming down her cheeks before she uttered a single word. The fox inside her had calmed down, finally recognizing the chakra signature, identical to her own, but tinged with the unmistakable love and stubbornness of the bloody Havanese. "That ridiculous blonde hair. And my stubbornness," sobbed Kushina, stopping a meter away from him. "How could I be so blind, I bane you." Naruto felt the lump in his throat threatening to choke him. Seeing his mother cry was the one thing he wasn't prepared for. "Kushina. Me." Naruto lowered his gaze, tears finally overflowing from his blue eyes. "I'm really sorry about what I said to you in your apartment. I'm sorry for breaking your heart. I had to push you away, because if you loved me, you would have never loved him. And I would never have been born." Kushina shook her head frantically. He shortened the distance with a jump, and, even though Naruto's body was turning into light, he managed to wrap him in a desperate hug. She infused her entire Uzumaki chakra into her own arms so she could touch him, clinging to her son with the strength of a mother who refuses to let him go. "Shut up, you idiot!" Kushina cried, sinking her face into Naruto's shiny shoulder. "You don't have to apologize for anything. You endured all that pain all by yourself. You fought in a war that wasn't yours, just to protect us. You are the most amazing ninja in the whole world, Naruto." Minato came closer, his own eyes shining with tears, and put his arms around both of them. For a few brief seconds, the Namikaze Uzumaki family was complete amidst the ruins of war. A legendary father, a fierce mother, and the son who would bear the fate of the world. "You saved us, Naruto," Minato murmured, his voice trembling with emotion. "You saved our future. I promise you that, when the time comes, we will give you all the love you deserve. We will raise you to be an even bigger hero than you already are." Naruto's body began to disintegrate into thousands of particles of golden light, ascending towards the night sky. The anchor had completely broken. The future was calling him. Naruto closed his eyes, feeling the warmth of life's embrace. From his parents for the last time. He opened his eyes and gave them his brightest and most characteristic smile, that smile that could light up the darkest night. "Don't change anything, okay?" Naruto said, his voice barely a whisper in the wind. "Fall in love, eat a lot of ramen, and don't worry. Occupy for me. I'll be fine. I have the best parents in the world. Take it easy." Kushina let out one last sob, trying to cling to her hand, but her fingers only caught light. With a blinding flash that illuminated the entire crater, Uzumaki Naruto completely disappeared from the timeline. Silence enveloped Konoha. The golden light scattered in the atmosphere, mixing with the first rays of dawn that were beginning to peek over the horizon, tinting the sky a beautiful orange and violet color. Minato remained kneeling on the ground, hugging Kushina, who was crying inconsolably on his chest. The yellow lightning rested his cheek on the red hair of the woman he loved. Doubts, jealousy, and fears had disappeared, swept away by the sacrifice of her son. "He will be waiting for us," Kushina whispered Minato, watching the sunrise. "With an unwavering determination. We will build a peaceful world for him. I promise you that." Kushina nodded, wiping away her tears and holding onto Minato's vest. He looked up at the sky, feeling that a part of that golden light had stayed forever in his heart. The Third Ninja World War ended a few months later. The legend of the Golden God who swept away the Vihulas in one night became a myth whispered among the villages. A secret jealously guarded by the third cage, Minato and Kushina. No one knew where that warrior had come from, or where he had gone. But in the heart of Konoha, two young shinobi knew the truth. They knew that love transcended time, and that somewhere in the future, a blonde boy with marks on his cheeks and a heart of fire were doing to change the world. The years passed over Konoha like dragged leaves. To the autumn wind. The Third Ninja World War was over, leaving deep scars, but also a lasting peace. Minato Namikaze had become the fourth Hokage, and together with Kushina Uzumaki, they had built the home they once dreamed of. In the reign of a megacure. It was the night of October 10th. The secret shelter on the outskirts of Konoha was plunged into chaos. Kushina, exhausted and sweating profusely, was holding a small bundle wrapped in white blankets. Minato was by her side, tears of pure happiness streaming down her face as she caressed the tiny head covered with a scanty blonde hair. The baby slowly opened his eyes, revealing two bright sapphires, identical to those of the man who once descended from the sky. Wrapped in golden light. On his soft cheeks, 3 pairs of faint mustache marks were clearly drawn. "Naruto," Kushina whispered, her voice weak but brimming with immense love. She pulled the baby closer to her breast, feeling a surge of nostalgia. "He looks exactly like him, Minato. Our little hero." Minato smiled, kissing Kushina's forehead. "It is. Jiraiya chose the name of his book, but we know who gave it its true meaning." However, the peace of that night was ephemeral. History is an indomitable river, and the fate of the shinobi was written in blood. A masked man broke through the barriers. The seal weakened. The nine-tailed fox was released into the heart of Konoha, unleashing hell once again. Hours later, the forest outside the village was in tatters. The huge queue was roaring, temporarily chained by the last and exhausted kitchen diamond chains. Minato and Kushina were standing in front of the ceremonial altar where little Naruto was resting. The fox's massive claw had pierced through both of them, stopping within millimeters of the newborn's crying. They were dying. Their lives were draining away with every drop of blood that fell on the wood. But, unlike what the original story dictated, in the eyes of Minato and Kushina, there was not only despair or terror for the future of their son. There was an absolute certainty. An unbreakable peace that physical pain could not erase. Kushina coughed blood, but forced a dazzling smile, looking at the face of her baby. He remembered the warm and protective embrace of that young man with the threadbare cape. He recalled her tears on the hospital rooftop and her golden smile before fading into the light. "Don't cry, Naruto," Kushina whispered, her tears falling on the baby's cheeks. There will be pain. And there will be times when you will feel lonely. The village will be cruel at first. But I know that you will be strong. I know you will find friends who will love you. I know that you will become the greatest ninja of all. Because I've already seen you, my love. I've already seen the great man you're going to become. Minato, gathering his last strength, began to trace the seals of the Shiki-Fijin death demon-consuming seal to split the fox chakra. He looked at his son with infinite pride. You are our legacy, Naruto. Your mother's words are mine, the fourth Hokage also said, feeling the darkness of death envelop him, but his spirit shone brighter than ever. We trust you. Forgive us for leaving you this burden. But we know you can take it. See you in the future, son. The seal was closed. The lights went out in the forest, leaving only the cry of a newborn that carried the hope of the whole ninja world inside. In a very distant time, on a devastated battlefield where the moon had just lost its blood-red color, a blond boy opened his eyes with a sudden gasp. Naruto Uzumaki sat up abruptly on the rocky ground. Her clothes were in tatters, and the Fourth World War girl had just ended with the fall of Kagaya Otsutsuki. Sasuke was a few meters away, breathing hard, and Sakura was running towards them. Naruto put a hand to his chest, feeling his heart beating 1,000 times an hour. In his mental space, the huge orange fox opened one eye. Are you okay, brat? Kurama asked, his voice tired but calm. Naruto blinked. The memories of the war, of Obito, of Madara, everything was there. The timeline was intact. The future had not been broken. But, deep down in his memory, there was something new. A memory that I didn't have before. I remembered the cold rain of a megacure. He remembered the smell of jasmine and old scrolls in a small apartment in Konoha. He remembered the desperate embrace of a red-haired woman and the proud tears of a blond man in the middle of a shattered crater. It had not been a dream. It had happened. The loop had closed. Naruto lowered his hand from his chest and gently touched the marks on his cheeks. A wide smile, serene and full of absolute peace, was drawn on his face, illuminated by the sunrise. He had lived his entire childhood believing that no one had loved him at birth, that he was just an unwanted vessel. But now I knew with complete certainty. I had felt his embrace. I had heard their voices. He knew that his parents had loved him with an intensity that defied the laws of time and space. We made it, Kurama whispered Naruto, slowly getting to his feet and looking up at the rising sun. As his friends came over to hug him. We're at home. And them? They were always with me. Take it easy. The wind blew over the battlefield, carrying away the ashes of the war and leaving in its wake the beginning of a new era. The story of the Zoro and the Habanero was over, but the legend of the seventh Hokage was just beginning to shine through. End of the story. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next theories. Would you also support me by joining as a channel member? The link of the creator of the story will be in the description. That said, see you in the next theory. Bye.